In this video, I embark on an 800-mile road trip and swap the winter sun of Gloucestershire for the drizzly grey of Paris in my 160-mile range EV, the MG SE Standard Range. Join me in my fully laden MG4 as we conquer appalling weather, different charging networks and French and English roads. We start from Middle Earth Gloucester, and as you can see it's pretty sunny, it's mild for October. But enough about that, we need to get to Folkestone for 6:30 PM. There's just a few more bits to pack in the car. As you can see, we're pretty tight in the boot there with two large suitcases and loads of snacks and drinks. Let's get the car set up for the route, and then I shall show you the route we're going to take and where we plan to stop for charging. So the car's charged to 100%. We're going to select the eco settings for the vehicle and turn lane assist off. And as you can see, since I turned it off, it's actually affected the estimated range on the vehicle, and it's now jumped to 203 miles. Now I'm not expecting anything near that. I've got a fully laden car, and we're going to want all our creature comforts and make sure this is a comfortable journey. Now in terms of guidance for the journey, I shall be using Apple Maps via Apple CarPlay, and I've planned the charging via my Electroverse app, which is by Octopus, and I should be able to plan all of my charging stops and should be able to activate all the charging through the app or through my RFID card in both the UK and also France. But anyway, let's move on to the route and show you exactly where we're going and where we're stopping. So we will start off in the West Country and head east towards London using the M4 as our trunk route, and then south around the M25 until we get to Junction 9 for Cobham services, which is approximately 115 miles. Now Cobham Services has Ionity and also GridServe, but I can use Electroverse with Ionity. We're also planning to stop here around meal time so we can eat while we charge, and then we're not wasting any time. I plan to charge to about 80%, and that should be more than enough to take us down the M20 and finally to Folkestone, where we will pick up the shuttle. Before jumping on the train though, we shall try and get as much charge as we can from the Tesla superchargers, then that way we can try and minimise the amount of charging stops in France. Once we're in France, we'll head down the A26 until it meets the A1. Then we should be stopping at Fastned at Aire de Saint-Leger on the A1 for our third and final top up. This will take us all the way down to Saint-Witz, where we should be staying overnight before we arrive at Disneyland Paris first thing in the morning. Our hotel actually hosts a bank of Ionity chargers, so we'll be able to top up overnight and have a full charge ready for the morning. As there's no charging in Disney itself, we'll make the most of those Ionity chargers, and then that puts us in good stead to return 5 days later. On the way back, we will repeat an identical route, stopping overnight at Calais just before we return on the shuttle, and then all the way back via Cobham again back to Gloucestershire. And if you like this kind of content and you're enjoying the channel, a like and a sub would be fantastic. Now I plan to drive the route as much as I can at 70 miles per hour or the national speed limit in whichever country. I'm really not trying to eke out the miles. I've planned my trip and I want to get from point to point as quick as possible. If I dawdle along, I have an unhappy family on my case, and this is meant to be a holiday, not a punishment. Now if you've seen many of my range tests, I'm no stranger to running a car down to next to 0% state of charge. Now I will be a little bit conservative on this trip. I have my family with me. As you can see, the car's fully laden and the weather's due to deteriorate later on. Now we've sailed on smoothly along the M4 and as quick as I legally can. We're approaching Newbury on the M4. Apple Maps has informed me we can shave some time off the route by leaving the M4 and heading towards Basingstoke M3 and then linking up with the M25. Whether there's traffic or an incident, I'm not too sure, but I'm all in for saving some time. I can see many ahead of me and behind me doing the same thing, so I'm guessing we've probably dodged our first bullet with some traffic. Part of the route between Basingstoke and the M3 has meant I'm driving slower on A roads and at 50 miles per hour. I have no choice but to continue at this pace, and although it's not ideal, it is helping with the efficiency of the vehicle. But it's not too long before we're firing at 70 miles per hour and the MG4 is lapping up the miles and we're very chilled out and comfy in the cabin. Next we hit the M25, and as usual we're at the mercy of the UK's largest car park. But again, we're going pretty slow, and although it's stop and start, we're doing pretty well with the efficiencies and we're nice and chilled in the cabin. And I'm amazed to see we've completed nearly 112 miles with 39% of the battery remaining. Not bad. Now unfortunately we'd also hit our first charging headache, and Ionity was full. We were actually in a queue behind 3 other cars, and about 15 minutes later we were able to pull in and plug in. Now we plugged the car in and went for some food and left the car charging to 80%. Now I used my Electroverse card, so I got a little bit of discount on that, but I'll reveal all the pricing and how much it cost us on this trip at the end of the video. And just on a side note, if it hasn't already, this site at Cobham is actually going through an expansion with at least 10 more chargers. So let me know down in the comments if you've seen this expansion open or not. Right, back onto the M25 and back heading down to Folkestone. As you can see, we're on the M20 now, and we're running alongside that channel line from London down to Folkestone. We're not hanging around as we do need to catch this train, and I also want to have an opportunity just to top up at the Tesla supercharger to make sure that we got plentiful of juice when we head into France. Now, unfortunately, arriving at Folkestone was the beginning of a few setbacks on the journey. First of all, our ticket didn't scan at the barrier, and even when staff come over to help out, we were still having issues and I had to change lane. Eventually we did get through and I managed to plug into the charge, but we were informed we had 10 minutes to get to our train. Now we all ran in, used the toilet and literally ran back to the car. Of course this wasn't as long as I wanted for charging. I did want to charge to at least up to 80%, but we had to make do with what we could, and we all jumped in and headed off. Now one thing I didn't take into consideration was you had to go through passport control on the British side and also on the French side. This felt like an eternity, and of course that led us to the lane of shame and missing our train. Now although it is a setback, it did give you time to reflect. I think if this was to happen again, I'd probably just miss the train and get that charge in, because that sets you up in good stead as you go into France. Now having reviewed the route, we're going to have to look at our plan B now. Instead of stopping just once for the whole journey in France, we will have to stop a second time. So 35 minutes later we finally start moving. I can leave the lane of shame and we can start making our way onto Le Château. So we start with 50% state of charge at this point, estimating 152 kilometers. Now our next planned stop was actually 80 miles away, or 130 kilometers roughly, and although we did have that available to us, again I'm trying to be conservative and make sure I don't make any silly mistakes. And having 30 minutes now on the train, made sure I could make some good calculated plans of what that plan B was going to look like. In the train we just relaxed, switched the car off and just chilled out for 30 minutes. I knew in the back of my mind what route we're going to pick, so it was just a case of letting that 30 minutes pass. And before long, we were out the other end of the tunnel. So we leave the Le Château terminal and head on our plan B to Saint-Martin-en-Laye, which is just off the A26 on the way to Paris. This is about 42 kilometers in distance, which is more than achievable for the vehicle. It also has a McDonald's next door, so we can get a little bit of food and get some much needed coffee. I'm also glad we picked this charger as well, because one thing we found out as soon as we got into France is just how windy, wet and blustery it was. And I knew this would take a little bit of an impact on our efficiencies. For whatever reason, this particular charger didn't like my Electroverse card, and it didn't let me start the charge through the app either. It did take credit cards and debit cards, so I just used that on the contactless point and we were good to go. So our final stop was going to be at the original charging destination we had for the route, which was Fastned Air de Saint-Léger. And this was going to see us leave around 70% state of charge and arrive there at around 15% with a full deep charge, and that would be enough to get us to Saint-Wietz with at least 14 to 15% state of charge remaining. Obviously, again, I'm trying to be conservative on the route, so any extra charging, if it means it's an extra 5 minutes, I was going to put it in the car. So we were here for roughly 45 minutes in total. That included a toilet break and a quick snack in the services. Now this Fastned charging facility, well illuminated, it felt very safe even at a late time of night. Now, as much as I want to tell you how great this charging station is, we need to get on the road. We've got at least an hour and a half on French motorways before we can finally get to our hotel. If we can get there before 1 AM, I'll be dead happy. And lo and behold, we arrive at the Novotel a little before 10 to 1 in the morning. Now let me just show you the charging situation here at the hotel. So we have a bank of 13 high power chargers from Ionity, and then next door, literally just over the road, there's also another charger station. So we are spoilt for choice. I'm going to get my car plugged in here. We're going to leave it plugged in overnight because there's loads of space here, and our room is actually opposite the charger, so I will probably be up at quite early in the morning, so I'll just check to make sure that I'm not blocking anyone in. Now, I did mention there's no chargers at Disney where we're staying, so we're going to charge to 100%, and then we've got enough battery to get to Disneyland Paris in the morning and get us a large segment of the way back through France. So I'm going to leave the car juicing up overnight. I'm going to go inside, get my head down, have a nice breakfast, and in the morning we shall leave with 100% of battery. So it's the next morning, it's a nice fresh day. As you can see, still tons of chargers available, so I don't feel bad for leaving it plugged in overnight. The car, as you can see, is at 100% state of charge, so we got loads and loads of energy to get us into Disneyland Paris and then get us back on our way on the return leg in 4 days' time. Now, as expected, we're greeted with rain and grey skies. After all, we are in France. But let's get on our way and straight back onto the A1. Now, I've driven this route many a times, and there's no greater pleasure than driving under the Charles de Gaulle airport. And as my luck would have it, we went underneath the runway with a plane going overhead. And to add to that, we saw our first sign for Disneyland Paris. We know we're not too far away. We finally left the murky grey motorways for the greenery of the surrounding areas of Disneyland Paris, and it wasn't long before we entered the inner circle of Disneyland Paris itself. So we need to check in and get the car parked up. As you can imagine, I was thrilled to see that there were actually chargers in the car park. The good thing about these, they were 7 kilowatt chargers, which are great for slow charging overnight, and they were free of charge. So even though I was able to top the car up during our stay here, I was a little bit disappointed because if I'd have known that these chargers existed, then I wouldn't have charged to 100% at Ionity. But never mind, at least I know I'm going to leave here with 100% state of charge. Anyway, fast forward 4 days, we're charged to 100%, which we did overnight. Let's have a look at the route which we're taking on the way back. Now, we're actually stopping at Calais for the night, so we just need to get to Calais. Now, in total, we need to do roughly 193 miles. So we need to make at least one stop. And again, we're trying to plan this stop around our meal times, so we're not losing any time on that journey. Now, Electroverse actually suggested making 2 stops. The first stop was at Restaurant Samats at Total Energies. And then we had a second stop, again at Total Energies, was just outside Angers on the A26. Then finally we travel the remainder of the journey in France to Calais, where we stop overnight. And then the following morning we head back on the shuttle, back up the M20, round the M25, stopping at Cobham again for a charge, and then along the M4 corridor, up the A417, and then back to Gloucestershire. Now, before I do carry on, I will mention that I have suggested to both Google and Apple Maps to include these charger positions at Disneyland Paris. I've checked the maps since the journey and they still haven't been added, so if you do know anyone who's going in an EV, then please let them know that they can charge at this resort. Anyway, back to the journey home. So it's 5:22 p.m. We're leaving the car park here at Hotel Cheyenne at Disneyland Paris. As you can see, the weather's pretty rubbish already, and just as a pre-warning, it's not going to get any better throughout the journey. It's been pretty blustery throughout the time we've been there. You can see the leaves all over the road, and this is just in the resort car park. But anyway, back onto the road. We're going to head along the D5 northeast out of Disneyland Paris, and then join the N3, which will take us south of Charles de Gaulle, and then joining back up on the A1 northbound. So we're heading north. We're all pretty chilled out. We've been running around like headless chickens for 5 days, so it's actually quite nice just to be chilled in the car. It's nice and smooth, and although it's really blustery, the cabin in this car is very quiet, and it's not long before someone is snoring in the back. After the first toll booth, we've started already seeing signs for Calais. It feels like we're nearly there already, but we know there's still a trek to go, and we do travel through the beautiful French countryside, and it does look great despite the wind and the rain. One of the things I have really enjoyed about driving over in France is there is lots of pre-warnings about how far the next services are and what facilities they have. So it was very easy to find what services will have EV chargers and which didn't. Now, I've obviously used Electroverse to plan my journey, but if you didn't have Electroverse and you didn't have any other tool, you could use the signposts, which very clearly state which services have EV charging and which don't. It wasn't long before we stopped at our first charging stop, which was for Total Energies. Now, like the charging facilities on the way down to Paris, we've never stopped at any of these before, and we only had what was in the Electroverse app to give us some idea of what was at these services. Now, what I was blown away with was just how good these services are. They had lots of eating establishments here, including McDonald's, which was of course going to be the kids' favourite, but it also had a fantastic charging setup as well, with many high power chargers available, and they were also expanding the site as well. Now, using the charger was dead easy. In this case, I used my RFID card, which come with Octopus Electroverse, and just scanned the charger screen, and then my session started immediately. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the journey, I could have technically done Disneyland Paris to Calais with just making one stop, but I elected to do two as per direction of the Electroverse app. And even though we're at 65% state of charge, I'm going to leave the car charging throughout our meal. There's loads of space at the charging station, and I have my eye on it anyway from the restaurant, so if it does get congested, I can just quickly come and move the car at 80%. Now, there was a maximum of 3 cars the whole time we were there, so the car's actually charged up to 99%. It's nearly 100%. So let's get on with the journey and head to the next charger just before we get to Calais. And as you can see, the weather has really deteriorated, so let's get on the road and get through this. Now, one thing I have really appreciated since being in France on the A1 here is it is literally in the middle of nowhere, and back in the UK, even on the motorways, you're never too far from a city or town, so you do get that light pollution in the sky. And because we were in the middle of nowhere, it is literally pitch black here. It was a good test to see just how good these headlights are, and they did perform pretty well. Now, we had the high beam on pretty much the whole time, and it seemed to illuminate the road really well, and there was no issues with that. Don't get me wrong, they're not perfect by a long way, but they did a really good job for this journey. So more or less an hour later, we have hit our next charging stop. Now, again, we didn't need to actually stop here. We probably could have just got to Calais with the charge we had. We used 40% of the battery to do that hour's worth of driving, so to do another hour we could have definitely got by and probably arrived with around 15% state of charge. But we're going to charge here anyway, stretch on legs, have a little walk round, and again, I'm trying to be a little bit conservative because I do have my family in the car and the conditions are pretty rubbish at the moment. Now, this is Total Energies again, and we use Electroverse to do the charge here using our RFID card, and very quickly when I was charging I spotted this tariff pricing behind me, which warns you of idle fees when you've been at the charger for 45 minutes or more, so definitely be careful of that. But we've been here 15 minutes, it's more than long enough. Here's the journey for the rest of the trip in France. It's about 58 minutes. We're up to 81% state of charge, so let's unplug the car and get on the road and get us to Calais. Now the awful weather did continue, but we powered on and it wasn't long before we were passing through our final toll booth in France. And ahead of us was the Holiday Inn on the seafront in Calais. So we finally arrive in Calais at the Holiday Inn. Let's have a look at the data on the vehicle. So we arrive with 45% state of charge and it's nearly 20 past 10 in the evening, so just over a little over an hour it's taken us to get here. But fast forward, a great night's sleep and a hearty breakfast later, we're greeted to this lovely sight. We didn't quite have this vision late last night when it was raining and pitch black. But we want to get on our way and we're going to head straight to the Le Shuttle terminal. And we're also going to try and charge the car up as much as we can to make sure that we've got plenty to get to Coburn services later on this morning. We're only a few miles away from Le Shuttle, so let's get on our way. And we've got plenty of time to stop for a cheeky duty-free visit and juice up at the terminal. And we're checked in and we're finally here. So let's head over to the terminal. Let's plug in the vehicle. We're going to use the Tesla supercharger network here. There are other chargers are available, but I selected the Tesla supercharger because I know that they've got excellent rates here in Europe as well as the UK. So let's plug in and then get ourselves into the terminal and get us some cheeky duty free and also a couple of presents for a few people back home. So we stopped for a little over 20 minutes, that's enough to visit the toilet and do the shopping, and then we're back on the road again. We're going to head up to the train, which includes stopping at passport control. I'm not going to make the mistake of underestimating how long that takes again. So it's nearly 10:15 in the morning. We're heading up to the actual train platform, but we do have to go through this long-winded route first to get there. And I must say, this would make a great racetrack. But we're not here to race, we're here to get on the train and get on our way. So now we're back in the UK, let's crack out the phone and have a look at Apple Maps and look at where we're going. So we're heading 2 hours and 2 minutes or 77 miles to Coburn services, where we'll stop to grab some food because it'll be around lunchtime and then we can charge while we're eating. This should be our last stop of the journey and should take us all the way back to Gloucestershire. But we need to get out of Folkestone first, so let's hop onto the M20 and get the hell out of here. Would you know it, we are hit by the awful weather again. It seems to have followed us from France into England. And a couple of hours later, we are heading into Coburn services, which is where we stopped on the way to Folkestone 5 days ago. And we're going to stop here for a charge and obviously grab some lunch as well. That should take us up to as high as we possibly can, so we're looking at around 80% and maybe even a little bit more of that depending on how busy the charger is. Now unfortunately, as you can see, the chargers are full just like on the way out. Now we did have to wait, it wasn't for very long, only about 15 minutes like the way out, and then we plugged in and went in to obviously get some food. All the charging done through Octopus Electroverse again. That's activated on the app and deactivated also when we're finished. So we're all full up, we've all been fed and watered. Let's get on with the journey and get back home to Gloucestershire. As you can see here, we got up to 87%, so that's more than enough to get us all the way back. So we got back onto the M25, and again we were at the mercy of the UK's largest car park. Once again the sat-nav took us down the M3 towards Basingstoke, and we were soon firing on all cylinders again. And eventually onto the M4, and for the first time we see sunshine and the rain is starting to calm down. Now we're not actually far away from home now, but we decided to make one last stop at Reading Services just for a quick toilet break. And while I was there, I couldn't help notice that they've installed the new version 4 Tesla superchargers, and why not go and try them? So while everyone was in the services, I plugged in just to give it a quick short burst. I didn't need this charge whatsoever, it was just to test the charger and see how quickly it connects to the car, which was reasonably quick. Now I have charged this car on a Tesla charger before, I know how quick they are. I have a Tesla as well, so I know exactly how quick they are at connecting. And these aren't much slower, to be honest. It just shows you how Tesla have got it absolutely nailed on, and I don't understand what other charging networks struggle so much with connectivity. But anyway, a very quick stop here. It was a slap and dash, just a couple of minutes. Everyone's now back at the car. Let's get unplugged, let's get in the car and finish this journey. And then we can have a look at the figures. We can see how long the route's taken, how much energy we've used, and how much, of course, it's cost. And there we have it. We're finally back home, clocking in at 3:35 p.m. Now, just very quickly, we'll look at the last distance we travelled, which was from the last charge, which was 74.5 miles. That took us an hour and 20 minutes. And then we'll look at the distance from Folkestone, which was 189 miles, taking 5 hours and 52 minutes. And next, let's now look at the total distance covered, which is 769 miles and an average consumption of 3.4 miles per kilowatt hour. Now, in terms of how long the journey took, the car is suggesting it took 20 hours 57 minutes. Now, this isn't quite accurate because the car is always registering time while it's switched on and active. You might not necessarily be driving it, so for example, if you're charging but sat in the vehicle, it will accumulate that time in the vehicle as part of the journey. Just in the same way, while I was videoing the driver's binnacle, that time was still continuously ticking even though we weren't driving anywhere. So in that case, let's take a look at the distance, which we know, and let's have a look, see how long the charging sessions were, how much energy we used, and how much that cost instead. So in total, on the way to France over the 3 days, I haven't included overnight charging in the charging length because it was while we were asleep, but all of our public charging while we were awake lasted 143 minutes. We used a total of 135.25 kilowatt hours from the chargers and a total cost of £58.01. Now, over 2 days on the return back from France to Gloucestershire, we used a total of 153 minutes of public daytime charging. A total of 84 kilowatt hours was delivered from the charger to the car, and at a total cost of £35.32. Now, you may notice we used a lot less energy through charging on the way back, and that was because we did that big charge at Ionity just before we arrived at Disneyland Paris, which set us up for the return journey. So what did that look like in total across the board for the whole trip? So we travelled 769 miles, or 1,238 kilometres. We used a total amount of 219 kilowatt hours of energy from chargers. Total charging time was 296 minutes at a total cost of £93.33, which works out overall at 12 pence per mile, or just under 8 pence per kilometre. Now, as I mentioned through the video, all of my charging and my stops were very, very conservative. It's not normally my behaviour when I use an electric car. It's just because I had the family and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to make any mistakes while we were in a foreign country. So there's definitely some savings we can make on time and definitely on costs. Certainly if we'd have knew we had a free charging at Disneyland Paris, that would have made a massive difference to that Ionity stop just before we got to Disneyland Paris. What is clear is charging in France is certainly better than the UK. It's definitely more affordable, and I think using the Electroverse card from Octopus made a big difference. It certainly made charging more accessible, easier, and of course cheaper. So why did I make this video? So I made this video because I wanted to demonstrate that it doesn't matter what the range of your vehicle is, as long as it's comfortable to drive and you have the right charging infrastructure where you are travelling. It doesn't matter what the vehicle is. And because the cost of the trip was £93.33 for the fuel for the trip, it's equally on par with any petrol or diesel car. But anyway, I'd love to know what you think. Let me know down in the comments if you would tackle this journey in an electric car, or would you prefer to do it in a diesel or petrol? Either way, let me know down below and give me your thoughts. Maybe you've done this journey before and you tackled it slightly differently to what I did, or you might have some suggestions how I might make it better next time. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the video, and a like and a sub to the channel if you like this kind of content would be wonderful. Thanks again. See you in the next one. Goodbye.